Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world with self-care strategies from Chinese medicine. I'm your host, Brody Welch, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Welcome to today's show. I'm your host, Brody Welch, and with me today is an expert in the connection between mental health and food. Dr. Christina Bjorndal is a naturopath who has a powerful story to tell of recovering from depression, suicide attempts, bipolar disorder, using food as a primary method. If you know of anyone who is struggling with mental health, or if you yourself struggle with these issues, you're going to learn a lot from this episode. I'm really honored to have Dr. Christina Bjorndal with us today to share her knowledge and to disseminate what is really not talked enough about in terms of the connection between our physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental health, and how they're all connected, and as well as what we can do to help our mental and physical health through food. Thanks so much for joining me today, Christina.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
First off, let's get into your story a little bit. I read in your book, which is called Beyond the Label, I read a little bit about your personal story, but I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing that today with everyone listening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it was really through my own struggles that I ended up becoming a naturopathic doctor with this emphasis and focus on helping people regain their mental health. So what happened for me was I developed an eating disorder when I was in high school, and an interesting side note on that was the year prior to that, I was treated for acne with antibiotics, which I didn't realize at the time, but have learned subsequently in my many years later in my research, that there's a huge relationship between the gut and the brain and the bacteria that we have in the gut biome and mental health. So that really was eye-opening for me. But back when I was struggling at the very beginning, I didn't have that information. So I just wanted to put that out there to get people thinking about that.
So I think it's a hugely important point that
Yeah.
when we take antibiotics, it's essentially a forest fire in our gut flora,
Right.
like that there is, it can be literally decimating to our gut bacteria, and it can take a while to recover from. And of course, that it's not something that as a teenager you're going to think about the connection between gut flora and your mind or your brain, and it just wasn't in the consciousness back then, and it's something that we're still just kind of coming to an awareness about, I feel like, in our society.
I agree. And I think the thing is too, what's going on back then as a teenager, I mean, your hormones are changing. So even though the acne was a physical manifestation of a deeper problem, it's not, and again, in naturopathic medicine, we really talk about addressing, well, what's the root cause? What was going on at the time? So I think that's really important for people to keep in mind. And so I ended up having this eating disorder, but behind the eating disorder was this overachieving behavior, which stems, I think, from being adopted. So I learned that I was adopted at quite a young age, and I developed a set of core beliefs that had me operating in the world in a certain way. And one of these ways was this overachieving perfectionist.
Was one of those core beliefs something about not being worthy, or
not being wanted, not being worthy, not being loved, lovable? Yeah,
that's a story that so many people can relate to, that I can relate to, whether or not we necessarily were adopted, but those early life experiences, those messages that we might have gotten about our inherent worth can absolutely set us up for all kinds of struggle later on in life. So getting back to yours.
Yeah, but it's I think it's a common theme, again, whether you end up with, the struggles that I had, or you just have this sense of self. So it's really important, I think, for people to think about, well, what are the beliefs that are driving you? And this isn't meant from a position of blaming anyone. I mean, we absorb our parents and the environmental influence that we grow up in, whether we want to or not. We just absorb, and we're like such sponges at that time. But the problem is sometimes these themes that we come up with aren't actually true, or they need to be rewritten. So for myself, that overachieving behavior served me really well until it didn't serve me. And I ended up in university. And in my second year, I crashed into a depression and anxiety, although I didn't know that that's what I was experiencing because I didn't have a framework of reference to understand what was happening to me. So I was racing on the track team, and a friend of mine was really concerned about me. I stopped going to practices, and she really noticed the shift in my mood and my energy and my state. And she went to I was going to UBC, and she went to the UBC health services, student services, and asked what she could do to help me. And the counselor she spoke to suggested that she make an appointment for me, which she did. And I went to that appointment, and I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. So I was prescribed an antidepressant, which I took. And then 6 months after that, I ended up having a delusional psychotic manic episode. And I was hospitalized and then told that I had bipolar disorder type 1. And I continued on without much integration, I guess, of either, that second diagnosis of bipolar disorder and even the first diagnosis of depression and anxiety. And I still hadn't dealt with the eating disorder either. So that was a big mess that was basically the solution that was offered to me was medication. And I struggled for a long time. And then I graduated and started working and continued that overachieving behavior. Ended up reporting to a CEO by the time I was 6 years into that corporate career. But meanwhile, every day wearing the mask of everything's okay on the outside, but I'm dying on the inside.
That is such a, I think, familiar story for a lot of people who look like they have it all together. They've achieved so much in the external world. They're making all this money. They've got the corporate job. They've got these trappings of success, and inside they're miserable. They're dying. They are not enjoying their lives and not paying attention to what their hearts, their spirits, their intuition, their bodies are crying out for. And yet it's interesting that you're getting to such an extreme of a suicide attempt and a bipolar diagnosis that wasn't a wake-up call of like, oh, I better look at my life right now. Is more just like, oh, this happened, I'm going to medicate it, I'm going to keep going. It's like that is it, because again, like, that's the idea of looking at it, well, really how we look at disease, that as a symptom is something to be medicated out of existence instead of an invitation to reflect on what's really wrong with life, like what's wrong in the context of our lives, what's wrong with the ecosystem that we're a part of. We're not necessarily encouraged to look beyond the symptom or to use that as a way of discovering what needs to change in our lives. That is so often medication is given to that by very well-meaning physicians who are trying to help, but we miss whether or not we take the medication. If we miss the opportunity to reflect on what's going on in life, that can be problematic.
Mm-hmm. And I actually am having an aha moment here with you. I mean, one of the things that's come to mind is I didn't love myself. I didn't like myself. I didn't like this diagnosis or this label. And I think I talk about in the book how this maternal wiring and imprinting that happens when we're in utero is a really can set us up for mental health challenges. And because I am adopted, the aha moment I was just having, I mean, I think I don't know that I'd have to revisit the book and see what I've said about this, but I think I feel that to the core of my being, the pregnancy, the circumstances around that, it was a teenage pregnancy. It definitely wasn't, I think this imprinting of not being wanted really goes back to then. And it's kind of it's a really deep wound that I've had to overcome. And the crisis of, I had a suicide attempt in 1994 that was what I refer to as my spiritual crisis. And it was when I came out of, ended up in a coma on dialysis, needing a kidney transplant. And I can tell you, when I woke up out of that coma, I really was not happy that I was still here. And a friend, that same friend that I mentioned earlier, she gave me a book to read called A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson. And it dawned on me that, I didn't like myself. I didn't like the labels. I didn't like the fact that my psychiatrist had said that I need to keep this a secret, that when you're in the corporate world, it can be cutthroat, and you don't want anyone knowing that you're bipolar because it's very misunderstood and can be mistaken and judged. So I processed that to mean that I needed to hide this. This was something that was shameful and almost like a black scar on, a tainted piece of me that I must keep stuck in the closet.
Oh, it sounds so lonely.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too that I think is important to mention is I think, yeah, see, there's a difference between the outside affecting the inside and the inside affecting the outside. So, for example, there's a difference between being upset and depressed because you've had, for example, a death in your family versus everything's going perfectly fine to the outside. Like, and this is what my friends, a lot of people struggled with, is that I seemed to have it all together. I had the job, I had the career, I had the boyfriend, I had it, but for everybody looking in from the outside, it appeared that I had all those check boxes checked.
She must be happy.
She must be happy, but I wasn't. And so this is the idea that the inside, i.e. the neurotransmitters that you make and the hormones that you make, affect how you feel. And it's not just about striving for these sort of successes that appear on the outside to be the answer to it all, because it's not the answer. And so the inner work you do is the answer. So,
and the inner work that we do from a psychological perspective can actually affect those hormones and neurotransmitters, correct?
Exactly. Your thoughts affect your physiology. So the thought you think creates a physiological cascade in your body. And so it's a bit of a catch-22, because for myself, when people would say to me things like, "Oh, Chris, just snap out of it," or "What do you have to be depressed about?" that was really hard for me to hear, because the thoughts I was thinking were very glasses half empty, a lot of self-hatred, a lot of self-criticism. I mean, the voice in my head was brutal. And I eventually had to learn to change that dialogue. So this definition of success and wearing the mask, that that everything is okay on the outside, but you're dying on the inside. What's important to understand is the real difference between a true mental health clinical diagnosis is that everything can be seemingly fine on the outside, but it's what's going on the inside that needs to be addressed. So for me, and for the listeners, what's important to understand is that you have 4 aspects to you, which is physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And disease can manifest in any one of those 4 layers. And often it's the physical level that is first addressed, especially when you go and see a medical doctor. And the beauty about seeing a naturopathic doctor or a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner or doctor is that we are working on the mental, emotional, and spiritual or energetic levels. And the physical level is an important piece. And often what happens is people get put on antidepressants, just like I did. But you have to think about, well, how do you make neurotransmitters, and how do you make your hormones, and what's the building blocks for those? And that comes from the diet
And
and
I would
food.
love to
Yeah.
delve deeper into that, because
Yeah.
I I know that that is something that a lot of people listening don't necessarily know how to do. So let's get into how we can make the proper neurotransmitters and how we can ensure that we're setting ourselves up to have the right raw materials for our minds and our brains to feel happiness, to feel
Mm-hmm.
contentment, to not have the raging inner critic, to not to feel calm and centered.
Yeah. So first of all, it's important to understand that there are different neurotransmitters, but the main ones that are involved are in mental health are serotonin, GABA, norepinephrine, epinephrine, dopamine, and glutamate. Now, some neurotransmitters are inhibitory and some are excitatory. And with mania and bipolar disorder, it's really important to maintain this proper balance because what happened to me was the initial antidepressant I started was a tricyclic antidepressant. This is more of an older class of medication, but it overproduced the excitatory neurotransmitters, and that spun me into a manic episode. So I think that the main neurotransmitter for depression and anxiety that's involved is serotonin, and many people have, I think, probably heard of serotonin. There's a whole class of medications dedicated to that called the SSRI medications. But what does serotonin get? How do you make serotonin? It comes from,
The gut.
yeah, but from an amino acid,
Mhm.
right? From tryptophan, comes from the diet. So a book that I've written Beyond the Label, but another great tool that for people and clinicians is called the Essential Diet, Eating for Mental Health. And I named it that because there are essential nutrients that you have to get from your food or supplements. You cannot make tryptophan. You just physically, we don't have
We're
maybe,
not
yeah. Well, I was just
not
gonna,
wired for it.
we're not wired for it. Maybe when, how we get new iPhones, they get upgraded. Well, maybe when the human being gets upgraded, we'll have that ability. But the current model of the existing human doesn't have that ability, nor do we have the ability to make phenylalanine and tyrosine. These are other amino acids that are important in the formation of dopamine. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter that's seen in addiction. And a lot of people have addictions. And addictions can come in many different forms. It can come from, to food, to gambling, to sex, to obviously drugs, alcohol, marijuana, exercise. There's lots of ways that addictions can show up in your life. But
And
I
just to clarify the connection between dopamine, like dopamine makes addictive behavior more likely to occur, correct?
a lack of
A lack
dopamine.
of dopamine.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
right. I'm thinking of
yeah.
those studies on people with Parkinson's where they were given dopamine
Mhm.
or L-Dopa or something like that,
Yeah,
and then
L-Dopa.
it led to gambling addiction in people that never had it and things like that.
Ah,
So, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, there's, I mean, dopamine is a really interesting neurotransmitter. And I think there's a great book by Gabor Mate. He's a Vancouver medical doctor based in Vancouver, and he's written several books, one of which is called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addictions. And it's basically dopamine is that reward system neurotransmitter, that feel good neurotransmitter in terms of this reward cycle that we get caught into. So I know for myself with the eating disorder piece, I was really stuck in this sugar addiction trap of needing sugar to calm myself and using sugar like it was a drug. But really, I think it was this ability to wanting to raise dopamine levels in me that was at play and behind the scenes. So the other essential nutrients though are the omega-3s are extremely important, iron, B12. Now some of these nutrients we can make, but if we are deficient in them from a dietary perspective, we are going to have a hard time making the conversion of tryptophan to serotonin, which
Right, because that's something that needs to happen internally. That's something
that's right.
that we're not what we eat, we're what we digest, and we can only make use of what we can process. And so a lot of times that we just because we're taking it in doesn't necessarily mean that we're processing it, and that can be true for food or supplements or really anything, information.
That's right. That's
So
right.
so in terms of you, just to bring it back to tryptophan and serotonin for a moment, that where can we get our tryptophan in ways that can lead optimally to the production of serotonin?
hmm So most proteins, so any protein, so turkey, tuna, chicken, beef. So think proteins when you're thinking about tryptophan. Now, the thing is, I was a vegetarian, so I wasn't eating those proteins. And vegetarians are really, and vegans are really need to be doing this properly from a nutritional perspective. I'm all for that. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
really I'm struck by the similarity of your story to my own in terms of the history of not enoughness leading to overachievement, along with anxiety and depression. And for me, I never tried to commit suicide, but I also had the sugar addiction. I also was a vegetarian,
Yeah.
I feel as though that sort of having a disordered relationship with food is something that I can
Yes.
remember from even elementary school or middle school.
Yeah.
And that the fact that in Chinese medicine, when I started to learn about the different ways that we diagnose depression or anxiety from that we think about different, there's not just one reason that someone might be anxious or depressed from Chinese medicine, but one of the common reasons that affects a lot of vegetarian women is blood deficiency, right? So
hmm
capital B blood, not
hmm
just iron deficiency, anemia, that kind of thing that Western medicine might be able to identify on a lab test, but a broader conception of that our blood is the medium of emotions and the medium of our sense of self. And so if we feel anemic, if we feel weak, if we feel like we're not powerful, if we feel like we're not okay, like we're not enough, that we're not substantial enough, like blood is this nourishing substance. And if we don't
hmm
have enough of it, like not only do we have difficulty getting to sleep at night, difficulty, there might be forgetfulness or spaciness or just a lack of energy overall. But it's like the heart is a medium of the heart that is the blood, and the heart is the emperor. The heart is the center of the body or of the emotions as well as the consciousness. And so if there's not enough blood to ground the Shen, the consciousness, the sort
hmm
of like, then you're going to be very mentally unstable. It's good. That could be anxiety. It could be depression. It could be bipolar. It could be all sorts of things because there's not enough of this medium. So this idea, and one of the medicines for, like many of the medicines for blood deficiency, is we prescribe herbs that are strong foods that are very high in or that are nourishing to the concept of blood,
hmm
but that we often recommend things like eating protein at every meal in small quantities,
hmm
frequently throughout the day, eating iron-rich foods like leafy green stuff, and
hmm
making sure, as well as like red foods like beets and brightly colored berries and cherries and things like that. But I think about blood deficiency just as like just one reason that someone could have anxiety or depression. So these are not universal recommendations, but it's like I know that there is it's just another thing to be mindful of. If you are vegan or vegetarian, nothing wrong with that. But if you struggle with
hmm
anxiety or depression, making sure that that you're getting your omega-3s, your iron, your B12, your frequent protein, for so that you have the raw materials that you need.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's ways to do it. If vegetarianism and veganism there's ways to do it, but I certainly wasn't doing it right. That's for
I
sure.
was not either. Yeah. Mhm.
Right. And so the interesting thing was that once I made the career change and went back to school to become a naturopathic doctor, it wasn't until second year when I was in second year nutrition, we had to do an exercise analyzing our diets. And even still at that point, when we did the analysis, what came up for me was I was still deficient in tryptophan. So it was eye-opening for me in that not one doctor in the 15 years prior had really emphasized, what are you eating? Like, it's easy for patients and people to say, "Oh, I eat healthy," but do you? Like,
Right.
do you
Right.
really eat healthy?
Right.
And
And yeah, and is
yeah,
it healthy for you versus
for
healthy?
you.
Yeah, like can you
Yeah.
digest the quote unquote
Yeah.
healthy food that you're eating?
Yeah, because going back to that whole, again, I had that the history of taking the antibiotics, so the gut flora was off, and this levels of stress is going to affect my ability to process food and digest and absorb nutrients, and then the diet was compromised. So there were a lot of strikes against me just from that physical piece of looking at the diet alone. And it was, it's one thing to take supplements to, and that's what happened to me is I ended up going to see a nutritionally oriented psychiatrist named Dr. Abraham Hoffer, and I became his patient, and he started me on all these supplements. But what he was doing was he was supporting that tryptophan pathway with all the cofactors so that I could make the conversion from tryptophan to serotonin. Because when tryptophan comes in the body, it's not necessarily going to make serotonin. There's two other directions it will go. One is to make niacin, because niacin is used in every cell of our body to make ATP. The other direction it can go is down a pathway called the chionuric pathway, and that makes more quinolinic acid, which is considered a neurotoxic and contributes to more depression. And that happens when you're under a lot of stress. So stress is a really important piece of this health
Right.
puzzle as
Yeah, you could
well.
be eating all the tryptophan rich food in the world and
That's
not
right.
having it convert if you are under stress all the time.
That's right. Because basically you've got two branches to your nervous system, parasympathetic and sympathetic, and certain functions in the body require you to be in a parasympathetic or relaxed state, digestion being one of them.
Yes, so
Yeah.
key.
So key.
We're going to take a little break from the show right now to bring you an exclusive inside scoop as to what it's like to participate in my self-care bootcamp transformational group, Level Up Your Life. I've got Celia here with me. She's gone through the course twice now, and she is signed up for the annual ticket for next year. Celia, thanks so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. I'm very grateful to be here, Brody.
Thinking back to before the first round of Level Up that you did, what were you struggling with?
Well, I've been seeking for a while on a spiritual path. I've learned a lot over decades of various groups. But the thing that intrigued me the most when you first offered that you were putting forth this course was, do you want to have the support to do the things that you know to do? I have a pretty broad spectrum of ways I know how to take care of myself, but I wasn't always able to implement them. So I would go on spurts of great self-care and I would fall away from it. And though I am in other support groups and have been for many years, I'd never taken an online class. So I thought, well, I trust you as a guide because I've experienced so much through our one-on-one work that it absolutely intrigued me. I was faltering in many of my practices, also dealing with some physical challenges in my body temple. And I thought, well, this is right along the lines of what I want to do. I'm not trying to use the word, I want to up level some of my practices. So even the name of the course just kind of gave me a little smile. So
Do you mind sharing what physical challenges you were dealing with?
yes, I had been plagued by a bad case of plantar fasciitis and a bit of arthritis in my foot. I deal with the story around food. So I was looking to find more peace in my body temple and to nourish myself more mindfully, healthfully. Again, fits and starts of eating very well for a while and then not eating as well as I would prefer. That is always a big thing for me to find some transformation in that area.
Got it. So you had a whole big toolbox worth of tools that sometimes you were good about using and sometimes not. And
Exactly.
okay, got it. And so what happens? How did you transform?
First of all, it kind of blew my mind in both rounds that I could actually get over my technological fear and do this. And having been in in-person groups, as I'd mentioned, I found it quite wonderful to see everybody's faces and actually feel the connection. Now, I believe in the energetic connection of all of us, that we are all energetic beings. but to do an online course and see the people. And then there is, of course, the resonance of hearing other people that were struggling with the same thing I was, which I forgot to mention that I'm a tender of people. I care, give, and take care of a lot of people. So,
and that's the thing that historically trips you up, right? Is like
yes,
that
it is.
Putting everybody else's needs before your own.
Yes, it is.
And you're in good company. And this,
boy, is that ever the truth, right?
Uh-huh.
One of our members came up with the term that this is a course that fosters exquisite self-care. And I would add the adjective radical, exquisite self-care. So that, I would say, has been one of my biggest pieces, is that it is imperative that I put the tending of my mental, spiritual, and physical household first within me before I tend to my mother, who I am her tender, or my farm, my animals, my wife, the many beautiful souls that I get to be in service to. I have got to fill my own well first. And that's the biggest takeaway I've gotten.
Awesome. That's something that I feel like it can be really hard to really get that at a cellular level, that you have the right to take care of yourself.
Yes.
And to me, it's like, I mean, that use the word online course, and it's like, to me, it doesn't even feel like an online course. It feels like we're all in the same energetic space, but that we are kind of like all in a living room together. We just happen to be spread across the country.
It does feel that way. And that kind of blew me away, because I've been in groups for decades, and I mean, I can just like resonate with the girl over in New York City, you know, as well as the girl across town right here. It's quite fascinating. And I will say, regarding one of the habit changes that is in the course, is about mindfulness. I mean, mindfulness is the thing. And I have found incredible transformation of how I approach my meals, which is a big deal, to sit down and consciously breathe and be present. Now, I knew all about this before. I've taken other courses about that kind of stuff, but some of it has stuck. Is it a perfect path? No. But when I am present for my meal and take those conscious breaths, it nourishes my body differently energetically, and I don't seem to want as much as I had previously wanted. So that is a big piece that I want more of. That's why I'm coming back for more. I want more reminders and moving as a group forward within the habit changes to anchor that even further.
Beautiful. And what changes have you seen? I know that you've done a lot around eating and
Yes.
changing your patterning there.
Yes.
And I'm curious as to the ramifications that has had for your energy, for your pain levels, for your inflammation, and for how you feel about yourself.
Well, when I eat in alignment with what I know is best, and when I am present for my meals, I believe, and you probably will, inflammation of the mind is going to cause inflammation in my foot.
Well put.
When I am de-inflamed in my mind through all of the flurry and eating haphazardly, everything feels somewhat inflamed. There seems to be that much more of the cortisol is released, a little bit of energy, the adrenals are kicked in, and I'm like fight or flight and all of that. When I am calm and present when I eat, my body just feels better. Now, have I lost all the weight I want to lose? Heck no. And it begins with this inner transformation. I truly believe, I truly know from previous experiences that to build a consistent practice of this is ultimately going to yield even more physical transformation. And my foot is feeling significantly better. The plantar fasciitis is resolved. I want more radical self-care.
I love it. I love it. And I'm so glad that you're a part of this group. 11 weeks is long enough for those habits, for us to be exposed to them and to maybe make a micro shift in that direction. But that what you're describing, it's like 11 weeks isn't enough to give you a new body entirely. That really, the magic happens when we continue in those few degrees of course correction on the compass. We've got to keep going in that direction. And over time, that takes us into a very different location on the planet than we would have arrived at otherwise. And so it's a matter of keeping on going until you reach the goal. And a lot of times the difference between staying on course and veering off course is having support.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
you use the wonderful term Kaizen, which is making the micro shifts. And that totally resonates with this other concept I read about in a fabulous book a number of years ago called Opening the Trim Tab on a Boat. When you turn a mega ship around, the first thing they do before they turn the rudder is they open trim tabs, these little tiny things that start a micro shift in the turning of the ship before they turn the big rudder. So a lot of my trim tabs are open. There's been a lot of shifting and a lot of turning of this vessel into a more consistent path to where I want to go. And I know that signing up for a year is going to help me turn that rudder.
Especially because as we start to turn, we get to a point when we're starting to see a different horizon, and
Yes.
it's terrifying, right?
Yes,
like that there's,
it
it's like
is.
an affront to the whole way that we used to be in the world. And you look out over this scary unknown, and it's really tempting to just fall back on the familiar. And this is where I feel like, in my life at least, having other people to hold me accountable for, like, no, it's okay. It feels different and it feels scary, but actually this is good. This is
Yes.
a new thing. This is growth.
That's true. Yeah, it is sometimes very uncomfortable to be the new and improved, empowered self, because the world has been trained by me rolling out the red carpet for every Tom, Dick, and Harry. So, woo, if I pull that carpet back in, people get a little curious as to what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. But actually, you're just not open for business at that point.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Wow, a boundary. Go figure.
Yay, boundaries. So Celia, if you could go back and tell someone in your shoes, or maybe even tell yourself before you entered this program, what would you say to someone who is feeling that call to make a change, to really bridge that gap between what they know they need to be doing and actually doing it? What would you say to help them figure out whether or not to do it?
I would say, if you're looking for a supportive group that fosters self-compassion as one of the utmost practices, so that you can realize the transformations you're looking for in your body and your mind and your spirit, with a mentor and a guide who not only has a wicked amount of knowledge, but it is applied and she intimately shares from her own personal experiences of transformation, and you want to just be loved up to transformation, then come on in, because it's working for me and I want more.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, Celia, and for those incredibly kind words of testimonial. I super appreciate it. And I hope that anybody listening for whom this is resonant, book your discovery call. Hop on in for the annual pass for 2018, because this could be your year.
Yeah.
So getting back to essential nutrients, I'm just curious if there are others that you could toss out there that are really critical for people to make sure they're getting enough of in their diet.
Mm-hmm. So that pathway of converting to get from tryptophan all the way to serotonin, you need to have the cofactors are vitamin B6, vitamin C, magnesium, zinc, and iron, and vitamin B5. So while those are nutrients that are really important, they're not necessarily, I'm going to say they're essential in the sense that they're essential for that pathway to happen. They're not essential in the sense that you can make those nutrients.
Yes.
Right. So the term essential is really, for me, referring to nutrients that you can't make on your own.
Got it.
Where you have to eat them. And again, there's these essential amino acids are important, and there's 8 of them. Tryptophan is the main one. And then omega 3s is another one that we have a hard time making those on our own. So those is another really important essential nutrient as well.
And what's your favorite source of omega 3s for people?
From a food perspective?
Yeah,
nuts. So cashews. So peanuts is tough. I love peanuts, but there's so many allergies now to peanuts.
Mm-hmm.
So basically nuts, walnuts, peanuts, macadamia nuts, cashews, the nut butters, and then the fish. So the wild salmon, the tuna. Again, fish we do have to be careful with. It's a moderate. You want to be eating it. Most people aren't eating enough. But if you overdo fish, there is this environmental component we want to be mindful of too.
Right. Taking in potentially everything that the fish were exposed to, which it could be a lot of pollution.
Yeah.
So,
but I think if you're having, I think people would be, I don't think people are going to be overdoing, it's not like they're having salmon 3 times a day for a week.
Really true. Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So you identify in your book 10 steps for people to regain their holistic health. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share a few of those steps that we maybe haven't touched on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll outline them, and then we can talk about maybe 1 or 2 in a little more depth. But basically the 10 steps, the foundation is diet, sleep, exercise, and managing stress.
Wow, have we heard that before on this podcast ever? I feel like, yes, those are the 4. I would completely agree. Yeah, go on.
And then just as we were saying, coming back to that stress piece, because again, if we can be eating the most pristine diet, but if we're 10 out of 10 on the stress scale, then we gotta really take a look at that.
Yes.
So then the next layer of the health house, I think that is really important, which relates to managing stress, is learning to look at our thoughts and our emotions. How do we behave and react in the world? How are we showing up in the world? The environment, from 3 perspectives. So I'll just go into that really quickly here. The 3 perspectives are what we were talking about: the quality of the food, the air, and the water. We're living in a chemically rich world now, and these chemicals can block receptors. So you may not have a problem making these neurotransmitters, but they may have a problem getting in the cell to do the job that they're supposed to do, because there's something from the environment blocking the receptors. So that's the first point with respect to the environment.
And just to fill that out a little bit for people, you're talking about things like xenoestrogens or things that mess with our hormones, or
that too. Yeah, both.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So there's the dirty dozen, which is the environmental chemicals that are sprayed on food, but then there's also the endocrine dirty dozen, and those are the xenoestrogens that affect hormones. So they are found in the cosmetics, things like phthalates, parabens, in mostly a lot in cosmetic products. Also, the furniture is very heavily chemically laden as well. A lot of people don't realize that your mattress is a big source. This idea of that new car smell.
Yes,
that's off-gassing, right? That's chemicals.
That is just nothing but chemicals, as is everything that is labeled fragrance on any body product.
That's right.
And the lining of cans, BPA, or even BPA-free things, if they're the sources of plastics that we're coming in contact with, especially the acidic foods.
That's right.
Buying tomatoes in glass. Pro tip.
Exactly. So all all these things that have, I think a lot of it's come about because of convenience, but we really need to look at the price that convenience is costing us on our health. So this environmental component would be a big, it could be a book in and of itself.
Where we are ecosystems, and so like the things that we're exposed to in our environment become us, just as the conversations that we're a part of become what we think about. And so like choosing carefully what we want to expose ourselves to, who we want to hang out with, and what we want to come in contact with our skin, an organ of absorption, with our air, all of that. So important to consider.
And whether you're going to heat your food up in plastic in a microwave, all these things are not to be doing, and a lot of people don't know. There's a whole section in my book about the environmental dirty dozen, and I have a quiz too on my website that people might like. It's just a quick, actually it's in the book too, but an environmental quiz that you can do quickly to sort of get an assessment for yourself. Is, oh boy, I didn't know about the BPA lining in canned food.
Great. I'll definitely make sure that there's a link to that. And just your site is drchristinabjorndal.com. And that's the last name is Bjorndal.
Mm-hmm.
So you are, go ahead.
I'll just finish the steps there. And so then the second part of the environment is this idea of epigenetics. So what that means is genes load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. So because I'm adopted, I remember asking the question, why is this happening to me? And the answer I got was, well, it's genetic. And that left me feeling like I was a victim.
Oh yeah, right. Because you can't change genetics,
You can't
except
change
that you
genetics.
can. I mean, like
Exactly.
to a degree.
Exactly.
I think about it as like the 5-card draw game, like where you get, you get 5 cards, but you get to throw a few back.
Right.
And so
Right.
you can make your hand what it
What you want it to
could
be.
be. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then the last concept is the idea of neuroplasticity, which is based on a book by a Canadian psychiatrist called his name's Norman Doidge, and the book is The Brain That Changes Itself.
Oh, I
So
love that book.
yeah, you're not fixed, right? In any way. You can change. You can develop a new neural pathways. And then the last area of the last step in the 10 steps is love and compassion for yourself, and developing the sense of self-esteem, because at the end of the day, we really need to wrap all of this up in love. And most people are who are struggling with their mental health are at some degree at war with themselves, and we need to work on that.
I'm so glad that happens to be the last step, because that was the last thing I wanted to ask you about today, which is that I'm very curious how you started to heal your relationship with self-worth and to start to really love yourself and come into include yourself in the circle of love and to start loving life again. And as I feel like that you must have learned something very powerful along the way to go from not wanting to exist on the planet to being
Mm-hmm.
a naturopath who writes books and helps people and helps really be the way shower for a lot of people dealing with the same issues.
Mm-hmm. So really, once that physical level was put in place after I went to see Dr. Hoffer, I still struggled, although I didn't struggle as much, but so that showed me that, I really still wasn't loving and accepting myself. And it was after reading A Return to Love that I had more awareness about that. And I ended up, I've done a lot of personal growth work, reading so many books, and there's so many wonderful teachers out there. So for me, it started with Eckhart Tolle and Cheryl Richardson, Wayne Dyer, Louise Hay, and learning to develop this sense of self-worth. And I think for me, having tried many times to commit suicide, and I'm still here. So this idea of, well, why am I here then? And if I'm obviously suicide is not the solution for me, and I am going to be on the planet, I need to find a better way to be with myself, because the way I currently, this is again, I'm talking about back in the day, the way that I was being and relating to myself was not kind, it was not loving, it was not accepting, it was very, 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 that inner critic, like I mentioned, was
Yeah.
brutal.
Well, and so at the same time, it's like people can read books, and it's another thing to really take it in and to really live
Mm-hmm.
into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking there must be something that you practiced, or something that
Mm-hmm.
you like, even just giving yourself permission to slow down and do less like that. How did you get there? If I always am really interested in the nitty gritty, because it's a journey so many people are on, and sometimes on again at a different point in their life, or to deepen even more into, I really am okay. I really don't need to outsource my self-worth by
Yeah.
running myself into the ground. And
Yeah.
so just like what or was there something that these books were encouraging you to do, or was it simply a mindset shift that just clicked?
Well, I think it was a couple of things. So one of the things was bringing awareness to the thoughts and separating. So meditation was really one thing that helped me separate from my thoughts. Prior to learning to meditate, I was so engulfed and stuck in the cloud of the thoughts that I couldn't differentiate between myself and the thought. And so what meditation helped me do, and a process that I teach people, is basically, it's called the 7 R's of working with problematic thoughts. So you just want to recognize, first of all, what are you thinking? And are these thoughts serving you? And if that voice in your head is unkind and critical, can we gently shift the dialogue? And for me, to go from saying I hate myself to I love myself was a very difficult transition to make, because it felt like I was spraying whipping cream on a pile of bullshit, pretty much, right? Because I could say, oh, I love you, but I didn't feel that, right? So for me, so what I did is I just went neutral, and I learned the work of Byron Katie, which is a 4-question inquiry where you basically challenge the thoughts with a question like, is that thought true?
Is it true?
Is it
Is
true?
it really true?
Is it really true, right? And how do you feel when you think that? Well, I feel pretty not very good.
Yeah.
How do you feel when you don't think that? Well, I feel a heck of a lot better. Okay, well, which thought are you going to think?
Yeah.
So
recognizing that we have a choice in how we shape our thinking. And again, that goes back to the brain that changes itself, and like that idea that the more that you choose consciously a different thought that you do in fact believe, that could easily be like, that's not just bullshit, that's something that you actually can make sense of, that you really can change your reality.
Yeah. Because what happens is that thought of I am unwanted or I am unworthy, as we talked about, creates that physiological cascade.
Yes.
That sets you up for more thoughts like that.
Yes.
So for me, I just went to I am, and just sat with I am.
Oh, beautiful. So really just aligning with the universal.
Well, and taking the descriptive labels out.
I am, right? I just am. I'm identifying with being.
Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that insight, and because I feel like that could really be of benefit to a lot of people listening.
Yeah, it's, the one question that really turned me around was, it took me a couple of years to be able to muster up the courage to listen to my intuition, to listen to this intuitive hit that I got, which was the answer to the question, if money didn't matter, what would you be doing with your life? And so for me, what came up for me at that time was to go back to school and become a naturopathic doctor and help people regain their mental health as you have been helped. When I went to see Dr. Hoffer, he was in his 80s, and he was, I thought to myself, well, surely this cannot be the only guy in the country.
Right. He's probably not going to be practicing for another 30 years. Like,
no, and he has passed away, and he passed away when he was 93. And so that's important, is to, this other step is learning to trust your intuition and learning to trust this voice of your heart. And a lot of people have a hard time being able to differentiate between what's their intuitive voice and what's the voice of the egoic mind. And so creating that space, I think, with the breath is really important. So
the space to listen. Yeah. Well, Dr. Chris, this has been a really informative and wonderful discussion. If people want to connect with you, is the best way to do that through your website?
Yeah, absolutely. So so Dr. Christina CH, and then my last name, which is a bit of a doozy, but you'll put the link up. So
I sure will. Yeah, people can just click over from brodywelch.com and they'll find their way to you. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. And is there any parting words of wisdom you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think I would just like to encourage people that are maybe struggling to, as hard as it might be, just to reach out and to speak out and to ask, to extend your hand, and then on the flip side, to the other person who may not understand or get mental illness and the struggles that people go through, to extend your hand in grace and love and compassion to that other person and to pull them up. Because this is I think a community health crisis that's going on, the rate of suicide and the rate of addiction, and people are struggling and hurting out there, and we all need to just love each other a little bit more. And so I
love that. Thank you. Yeah. So self-compassion, compassion for others, and perhaps making somebody some bone broth, to end on a later note, giving them some of those essential nutrients, making the appointment that your friend made for you. So we really can help each other. Yeah. Thank you so much again for sharing what you know and your powerful story, hard-won wisdom along the way.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for listening today. For more episodes of A Healthy Curiosity, you can visit the iTunes store. If you appreciated today's show, please leave us a review. This helps other people to find the podcast. You could also head to brodywelch.com, where you can find free self-care resources, learn more about Chinese medicine, and let me know what you'd like to hear about on future episodes. I'd love to hear from you. Till next time, be good to yourself.